The first passage is Isaiah 7:10 through 14. Is again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz. Ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be deep as Sheol or high as heaven. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, and I will not put the Lord to the test. And he said, Hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you to weary man, that you weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. And the second passage is Isaiah 9, starting verse 1. But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea and the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwell in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. For the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the tramping warrior in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, and to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, on the throne of David over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The seal of the Lord of hosts will do this.
Thanks, Daniel. Oh, sorry, dude. So who's ready for Christmas? Okay, I heard some kids. Have you guys ever noticed that Christmas has a lot of waiting involved? Kids? Yeah, right? It does feel like that, right? Like you're like, all right, it's December. Every day I think my kids ask, how many more days? I'm like, you know math, you can do this. But there's that anticipation, right? But come on, adults, you also enjoy it too, unless you're a Scrooge. But adults, you might be more anticipating, finally, eggnog is out. Or maybe you're like, oh, gross eggnog. Maybe it's the cookies. Maybe it's just the Christmas movies that you grew up with, that you're kind of like, oh man, we get to watch those again, even though I've seen them now 30 times. But there's also other kinds of waiting that happens. Have you ever noticed how slow Amazon is to deliver in Alaska in December? Extraordinarily slow for unknown reasons. We don't like to wait. Did you know that? We don't like it. And I can testify to that by a phone that isn't loading the website. And you go, oh, come on. In fact, in the history of humanity, we are worse at waiting than any other time because we have everything at our fingertips. And they've actually been tracking what our capability to wait, how long we can have an attention span. Did you know the last research I read was that goldfish have a longer attention span than humans now? Yeah, we've been passed by goldfish, guys. Here's the crazy thing, though. 3/4 of the Bible, the Old Testament, is waiting for a promise. That's a lot. 3/4. You could actually say that it's the entire Bible, in some sense, is a lot of waiting. And that's been going on. If you look at the Bible, you've got the first 2 chapters about creation and this relationship with God and the tasks of humans. And then comes Genesis 3, where the fall happens. And after the fall, God gives a promise. He says there will be one that comes from the woman, from a woman that will crush the head of the snake. And since Genesis 3, humans have been waiting. This text this morning that we have read is actually just a snippet of a much larger text that I'm going to cover, hopefully. The text that we just read, you probably recognize them from Christmas cards or things like that, right? They're very famous, the 2 texts. And in fact, I've preached on both of them at Christmas time. And if you've been here for any amount of time, you're like, oh, you probably have, or you don't remember, which is totally understandable too. Both of these texts are taken from the book of Isaiah. And Isaiah was written, like 700 years before the Messiah. In fact, this book of Isaiah has a lot of waiting in it. I'm going to do something this morning I've never done, and you can tell me if it was a giant flop, and that's okay. I'm actually going to try to cover the first 12 chapters of the book of Isaiah in one go. Why? Why am I doing such a large thing? Because the first 12 books is also known as the book of Emmanuel. If you don't catch that from what the song we just sang, the translation of that is, God dwells with us. God with us. So we're going to be looking at the greater text. Because I don't know if you have ever gone and you've looked at, like, say, the Isaiah 7 where we were. Emmanuel will come. Have you read the chapter? Have you read the chapter? Have you read the chapters before them? Because what you might see is you might go, you're reading, you're like, whoa. And then just all of a sudden there's this really 1 or 2 verses. And then it's back into destruction and judgment. You're like, whoa. And I think when we take those, it's not wrong to take them, put them on Christmas cards. It's not wrong. But what I want to do is give us a little more context for what's happening in the book and why it's so important that God comes to dwell with us. So if you will, please try to pay attention as much as you can. I've made a slide for every chapter, so hopefully we can summarize this as we go. One thing that I want you to know about the book of Isaiah, it is written after the fall of the kingdom. There was 2 kingdoms in Israel. There was one originally. They split into 2. The fall of the northern kingdom, that's most of the tribes, has already fallen. And then there's the southern kingdom of Judah, which has yet to fall, but it will fall soon. And Isaiah is talking to them most of the time, and also broadly sometimes just Israel. But he's talking specifically a lot of the time to Judah, who's about to go into exile. They don't know that yet, but he's telling them, because God's telling Isaiah to tell them what's going to happen. The other thing I want you to know about the book of Isaiah is it's not linear. Like sometimes when we read books in the Bible, there's narrative, there's story, they're one narrative thing. That's not what's happening here. It's not a linear thing. They're prophecies that are happening. Now, they are intertwined, but they are not necessarily one package in that a story, this, and then this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. They are one package. All scholars agree, whether or not they even believe in the Bible or not, that this is a unit, chapters 1 through 12. And there's 2 major themes, if you can hit that first slide. There's 2 major themes in the first 12 chapters of Isaiah. One is that there's a coming judgment, and I put /exile because those 2 run together. And then the other is that there's a future Emmanuel, God, to dwell with us. So you ready? Here we go. Chapter 1. Chapter 1 here, we if you can go ahead and just, as I say chapter, you can see, there you go. That's how we're going to do it today. In chapter 1, Israel is confronted because they have abandoned God. God warns them. He warns them that judgment is coming. There's three major reasons why he says that he's coming, this judgment is coming, is that they have rebelled against God. That they've rebelled against me, as he puts it. They have been idolatrous. They've actually sought out other gods. They've abandoned God. Isaiah 1:2 tells us, listen, heaven, and pay attention, earth, for the Lord has spoken. I have raised children and brought them up, but they have rebelled against me. Secondly, they've oppressed people. They've oppressed people that are image bearers of God. So not only have they rebelled against God, they've actually treated those who God has made in his image poorly. Thirdly, they've been actively doing false worship. And in particular, they will create, they offer sacrifice, and he says, stop bringing me useless offerings. In other words, they might even be coming and saying, this is to Yahweh, this is to the Lord, but they're doing it for the wrong reasons, or they're doing it with impure hearts, or maybe they want to get something out of it. I'm not fully sure, but he says it's detestable to me. That's what God says to them. Your offerings are detestable to me. And God tells them that Assyria will come and judge them in the later Babylon. Chapter 2, there's hope. In chapter 2, now we all of a sudden come upon, there's this condemnation, then he says there's hope. Isaiah 2:2, in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's house will be established on the top of the mountains and will be raised above the hills. All the nations will stream to it. There is a promise, hope, that one day God is going to dwell with his people, that God is actually going to have a mountain. Anytime you see a mountain, you see that the mountain of the Lord there. Anytime there's mountains, often, that's a place of worship. That was the place where God and man were closest. If you actually think about you think of their cosmology, right? Like up on the mountain. And that's where everybody would go offer sacrifice. In fact, Eden, where God dwells with his people in the Old Testament, is often seen as a garden on a mountain. So he's saying, on this mountain, all the nations will stream. So like, we went from judgment, and now he's saying there's hope. There's hope. There is a time where the nations will come to me. Not only that, there will be peace. He specifies even what mountain, the mountain of the Lord. That's in Jerusalem. That's the Temple Mount. If you think about what the temple is where God dwells with his people, right? The physical manifestation of that. And here they're using that picture again. He's using that picture again, that at one point, the presence of God, which had left, by the way, the temple, is going to manifest itself right there, and the people will stream to it. It's a beautiful picture. It's talking about all the nations coming. And not only are the nations coming, they're not fighting. There's peace. Isaiah 2:4 tells us he will settle disputes among the nations and provide retribution for many people. They will beat their swords into plows. No more war. No more conflict. God will bring peace. Chapter 3, really quick. More guilt. That's all I have to say. Chapter 3 is all just about more guilt, that they are still guilty and there still is more to come. Chapter 4, more hope. That God would come and he would wash the people. Remember, there's guilt. That's what he's been saying. Guilt, God's going to do something. Now he's going to say how he's going to do it. God is going to wash the people. Isaiah 4:4 tells us, when the Lord has washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and cleansed the blood guilt. It's not just a little guilt, by the way. Blood guilt. shedding of blood. He says, when he will cleanse the blood guilt from the hearts of Jerusalem, the innermost being of the people of Jerusalem, by the spirit of judgment and the spirit of burning. This washing isn't just a nice little scrub. It's burning. You know, like gold purifies when it's burned. That's what he's saying is going to happen. This judgment that is going to come, Merry Christmas, is a judgment of cleansing. And then in verse 5 of chapter 4, it says, the Lord will create a cloud of smoke by day and a glowing flame of fire by night over the entire site of Mount Zion. Just pause for a second there. If you know your Bible at all, this is all Exodus language. This is how the children of Israel came out of Egypt. God led them, and he led them as in the day by a pillar of smoke and at night a pillar of fire. In other words, God's manifest presence is coming down here once again. That God is going to cleanse, he's going to purify, and then it says in verse 5 that God is going to come and he's going to be with his people. That's what he's saying. That God is going to come, he's going to be with his people. And it says, for there will be a canopy over the glory. Verse 6, and there will be a shelter for shade from the heat by day and a refuge and shelter from the storm and rain. In other words, God is coming. He's going to dwell with his people and protect his people. He's going to bring them in. So after this judgment and purification, God's going to dwell like he did in Exodus, well, at least metaphorically. He's going to protect and guide. Now, my family and I went to a yurt. We hiked out this week, so sorry if you try to call me. I'm sorry. But the thing is we were walking out there, and just as we got into the yurt, freezing rain. And I would thought of this, that like a yurt where there was protection and heat, we were protected. Have you ever been in rain, in freezing rain, when you're going to spend the night? It's miserable. And God protected us from the freezing rain. Here again in chapter 4, this is his promise that he would be there, he would dwell with them and protect them. Chapter 5, more guilt. This time he's referring to the fact that they're fruitless. They aren't producing anything. He talks about how he planted a vineyard for them. And they're like fruit trees that don't actually produce any fruit. In other words, though God has poured himself into them, they have decided, I don't really need this thing. I'm not going to produce anything. And he promises that he's going to remove them. I put pruning. He's going to remove them, though. So again, guilt, judgment is a pruning exercise so that there will be fruit, so that the presence of God will come. Chapter 6. Are you guys tracking with me? Are you like, we're only at 6 yet? Let's keep going. I promise that there's hope at the end of this. Just wait. You like that? Isaiah. Now, this is a monumental chapter. Most of you have been in the church any amount of time. This is probably the one text in Isaiah you might recognize. This is where Isaiah finds himself in the presence of God, and he realizes his guilt. Now, Isaiah's job is to go proclaim what's happening. You are guilty, Israel. You're guilty. God is he's going to send judgment for you. It's a purification, and God will someday come and dwell with a remnant. But when he comes into the presence of God, he realizes, I'm guilty. He says, I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the glory of God. Woe is me. He's come to realize his own fault, his own sin, his own actual condition. It's not just him as like, hey, you guys are guilty. He's a part of it. The beautiful thing is that in that scene, it's one of my favorite scenes, God has a coal, that's what the picture is there, brought to his lips, and it burns. Remember the purification. It burns his lips, and he's purified. And then he tells him, you go out and tell the people what I have to say. So he purifies his guilt. He cleanses him. Who did the cleansing? God. Isaiah recognized he couldn't do anything. Oh, friends, this is our reality. We are no different than Israel. I'm not talking about America. I'm talking about us. I mean, America too, for sure, but us. We need the cleansing of God like Isaiah needed the cleansing of God. But then he says this in Isaiah 6:13. This is what God tells him. Though a tent will remain in the land, that's a remnant, it will be burned again like terebinth, probably saying that wrong, or the oaks that leaves a stump when fallen. The holy seed is the stump. I want you to hold on to that picture. Because what it's actually saying is that there's going to be a burning, a cleansing. There's going to be the tree. It's like the tree being cut down. And then the tree is not only just going to be cut down, it's going to be scorched. Now, we see wildfires here, don't we? You see the land that has been scorched. If you head down to Homer, you know what I'm talking about. Where the land has been scorched, but he says that there's a holy seed. A seed. What's a seed? Well, we all know what a seed is, but you also need to think metaphorical human seed, because he's talking about a people. That people, that there's going to be one that's set apart, a set apart seed, that this stump, the holy seed. So in other words, they're going to experience short-term exile, and yet, at the same time, God has not forgotten them. Because out of the rubble, out of the judgment, out of the short-term consequences, God was purifying the land and sending a seed. Chapter 7. This is the Christmas theme right here. It's chapter 7. Gideon, you mind clicking? Oh, wait. It says chapter 6. I'm sorry. My bad. Didn't catch that one. A sign. That he's going to send a sign. Verse 10 says, when the Lord spoke again to Ahaz, who was the king, by the way, of Judah at the time, ask for a sign from the Lord your God. It can be as deep as Sheol and as high as heaven. In other words, ask whatever you want and I will show you. God is saying, ask me. Let me show you who I am. What is Ahaz's response? It seems really churchy, I'll be honest. Ahaz replies, I will not ask. I will not test the Lord. Right, because in the Bible it says don't test the Lord. But here's the difference. God went to him and said, you test me. I'm telling you to do something. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do it. Why? Why is he not doing this? He's not doing it because he doesn't believe. He doesn't even want to. He's already made up his mind. Verse 13 says, Isaiah said, listen, house of David. That's the ruling, that's the promised line, right? Kingly line. Is it not enough that you try the patience of men? Will you also try the patience of God? Here's a beautiful thing. He doesn't ask for a sign, but he gives a sign anyways. Even though Ahaz doesn't ask for a sign as king, as ruler, like God, show yourself. God is saying, ask me to show me myself. Ask me to reveal. This is like knock and the door will be opened unto you. By the way, if you ask for God, like God, please reveal, he will. If you continue to search, he will reveal himself to you. This is a sign. He's asking you, I want you to ask for a sign. I want you to actually want this. And here's the sign. God gives a sign anyways. But frankly, let's face it. The sign is no longer for Ahaz. The sign is for the remnant. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. See, the virgin will conceive, have a son, and name him Emmanuel. 2 signs. One is that there's a virgin conceiving. I don't know if you checked anatomy lately. That can't happen unless God does something. 2, that she's going to give birth and it's going to be a boy. By the way, there is in this text that boy is 100% male. It's not like an ambiguous, maybe it's something else. No, it's boy. So it will be a boy, and his name, now if you remember, if you've been around long enough, you know that I like to talk about names because names in the Bible are super important, because a name isn't just a thing given to somebody, it's actually a position. It's way more than just like a name or a title. It's an identifier. It's who you are. And this name that is given is God with us, i.e., the same God, this same one that is dwelling, is the same one that has promised that he would come. That here we have him being more specific about what he said earlier, that God would come and dwell with his people. Here again, he's saying God is coming to dwell with us, and here's how it's happening. Chapter 8. More judgment. You guys seeing a trend here? Chapter 8, more judgment. He actually tells them to go ahead and prepare for battle that is coming. And then he tells them, but it won't matter. Prepare for battle, but it doesn't matter. You're not going to win. And then he describes the coming of what's coming like chaos waters. And I think this is intentional. He uses it as a river, but again, if you know your Old Testament, chaos waters are important. It's what we have at the beginning. It's what we have in the flood. Is waters that crush, kill, and cover. Oh, I just made that up. Crush, kill, cover. And then he says that there will be a darkness. By the way, do you know what land he says in here? He says that will be covered with this flood, these flooding waters. Emmanuel's land. Not Israel's land. He says Emmanuel, God's dwelling land, will be covered in these waters. He says, then they will be left in darkness. Verse 22 of chapter 8. They will look toward the earth and see only distress, darkness, and gloom of affliction. They will be driven into thick darkness. Then drum roll for chapter 9. Why? Because chapter 9 is all about hope. Verse 2 of chapter 9 says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. A light has dawned. What's dawn light? It's when there's been darkness, right? For a long time. And now, boom, all of a sudden on the scene. Have you ever been on the coast and you watch the sun come up and it goes, doosh? That's the picture here. And those living in darkness have seen a great light. Those who have been in despair, those who have lived, this is the remnant left, by the way, because he said that there would be a remnant left after the cleansing and judgment of the land. Then there's a remnant left, and that people would see a great light. And then he says a child would be born. By the way, where he actually says in verse 1, you can go back and read this later. I don't have time to go through the whole thing. He gives you 2 places where this light is going to happen. Do you know where those places are? It's under different names. It's the places where Jesus did his ministry, where he comes onto the scene. That's where the light. Just a little, put that in your hat. So that's the places that are going to get the light. And he says a child will be born. This child is going to be a ruler forever. This child is going to be of the kingly line of David. He will reign on the throne of David, i.e., this is the promised king that is coming. I want you to remember, this is 700 years plus-ish, give or take, or somewhere in there, from when we actually say that the Jesus came, by the way, the Davidic king. And he's saying that this one would come and he would rule, that a baby would be born. And not only that the dawn would change. And again, he goes back into, you can read it later, about the taking the swords and a plow and turn them into plowshares, like changing the way things are, the way the violence of the human reality is. Remember, they're in judgment because of the way that they have been. Because they've rejected God and they've sought their own way, which is murder, death, and destruction. That's always what it leads to in the Bible. And you're like, well, does it? Yeah, it does. Some of you are soldiers. Look at the world. How does it escalate? There's a reason you're in the military. There's a reason there is a military. Chapter 10. More judgment. And that there's a remnant. But this judgment now switches, and it actually is talking about the judgment of those who have been judging, who've been used the tool, like Assyria. They too will be held accountable for what they did. Assyria, Israel, you are being held accountable for what you did. You receive judgment. Now Assyria will also receive judgment. God isn't just like a lovey-dovey. He's a just God, period. That's just it. He's a just God. He's a merciful God, but he's also a just God. And he can't really be a merciful God unless he's a just God. Otherwise, he's just a pushover. And in verse 20, he says, on that day, the remnant of Israel and the survivors of the house of Jacob will no longer depend on the one who struck them. In other words, they've been kind of limping along from the powers of the world. It says that you will no longer, rather that they will depend on the Lord. The remnant will depend upon him and not the structures of this world. We're almost there, guys. Chapter 11. Chapter 11, he reintroduces the stump. Remember the stump? The burnt stump? Here he says that then a shoot will grow from the stump of Jesse. Who's Jesse? David's dad. That's who Jesse is. So one who's a Davidic king is going to be the one that from this rubble, burnt up rubble, i.e. people, that God is going to shoot up a shoot from it. It says that he'll be from Jesse, which is just code for David, and a branch from his roots will bear fruit. Wait, did you see that? They were judged because they didn't produce fruit. Now there's going to be one that comes from this burnt stub. It's going to be Davidic. It's going to be from David. Sorry, I keep saying Davidic, and I don't know if you guys, hopefully you get that. That's what I'm talking about, is David. And it's going to produce fruit. It's not just going to I'm here for myself. And the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. A spirit of wisdom and understanding, a spirit of counsel and strength, a spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. I just want you to pause really quick. What is it that we need? What is it that the problem back in Genesis 3? Why is it that they were taking the fruit? Why was that a temptation? Yeah, why? Why was that a frustration? I want you to think about this. Because they were called to rule. But they didn't have the wisdom. They were supposed to be dependent upon God for the wisdom to know how to rule, how to live this life. And when the serpent came to them, he said to them, He questioned God's authority. He questioned God's wisdom. And he said, you can have your own wisdom. You can be your own authority. You can have your own knowledge. Here, do you see the reversal? He will bear fruit. He's a Davidic king. The Spirit will come and rest on him. The Spirit of wisdom, the Spirit of counsel, the Spirit of knowledge. All the things that are actually needed to rule and reign. That's what it's saying here. Here's the thing. That word spirit in Hebrew is the same word that is used for the winds in Genesis 5. You go, what happened in Genesis 5? In Genesis 5, that's Noah. Where Noah is on the water. And he's basically like the family's like a whole nother unit of like a new Eden where we need to like land somewhere. There are the waters of death, and the wind comes and it parts the waters so that he actually lands. That's the same word of the Spirit coming upon him. In other words, he goes to the waters of death. This is a new creation. That's what's happening here. This is the true Adam, if you will. This is the true Adam coming and reestablishing. And instead of an Adam that would mess it up and do what he thinks is right in his own eyes, this one does what's right in God's eyes because it's a Spirit upon him that actually has him do it. And it says, verse 3, he will not judge by what he sees with his eyes. Who sees in Genesis 3? Eve sees with her eyes and she takes. It says he will not decide with what he hears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice, not just a perception of justice, with justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. Okay, we're almost there. Next slide. Okay, never mind. I had a slide in there. I probably put it out of order. It's L4. He's like, great job, everyone. You made it. We're at chapter 12. So kids, here we go. Chapter 12. Chapter 12 is a song of praise. It's a song of praise for the salvation. Verse 6 says, cry out and sing, citizens of Zion, for the Holy One of Israel is among you. Why are they rejoicing? Because God with us is with them. God is dwelling with his people, and they cry out with song. This goes back to our two themes. You can go to the next slide. That we've been watching. Pretty clear, isn't it? There's two themes going on. Judgment and God dwelling with us. Israel had abandoned God. They had treated people like commodities and not like image bearers. They had done false worship. And it brought exile, but not for no reason. So that they would be purified. There'd be a purification so that God could collect a remnant and then God would come and dwell with him. In chapters 1 through 12, we saw that it's a Davidic king from a stump of a people. That God would come and dwell. That this one who would come and dwell was from a woman who had not been with a man. And that this one who was coming would bring new life, not just for a few, but for the nations, where there is peace, shalom peace, as things should be, not peace as in like we have no war, but shalom peace, building blocks the way things are intended to be. Friends, why do I tell you all of this? Because all of these predictions, all this points to Jesus. Did you know that the whole of the Bible points to Jesus? Jesus was from the line of David. That he came from a remnant of exiled people. That he came from a woman. He was a holy seed with no dad. In fact, Drew and I had an interesting conversation when he was in the hospital about this, and the fact that they're still engaged when she has Jesus, which means she probably was shunned from her family at that point. Here's the interesting thing about this, that God would come and even go to that extent. That Jesus also is the one who came to dwell with his people. Do you guys realize that? That is a dwelling. When you come and you take on flesh as God and you live among people, that's dwelling. That he was sent by the... Then he later, when he ascended, he sent his Spirit to dwell in Pentecost on the believers. And he promised to one day dwell again in a new Eden. You know, it's interesting because the book of Isaiah is being written to people that are going to go through hardship. They are. And they're going to have to wait. And it's going to be real hard. Because there is a remnant. You realize that there's people like Isaiah himself who are the remnant that are going to have to go through some stuff. I'm not saying that you're being judged. Maybe. Sometimes we just do stuff to ourselves and we get judged, if you will. But they live, even when Jesus did come, they live in the now and not yet, just like we do. We live in the now and not yet. Jesus has come. We have this Davidic king, and yet we are still not at the spot where all things are renewed. Jesus is seated at the right hand of God, ruling and reigning, and yet we still wait. Friends, I don't know if you know this, the Christian walk, one of the major markers is waiting. It always has been. Does that scare you? That scares me a little bit. So I have a question for you. Are you waiting faithfully? Is there a remnant here? Are you faithful in your waiting? Are you looking for something else? Because it's hard. Isaiah later 12 tells us, surely God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. The Lord himself is my strength and my defense. How you doing waiting? You know, somebody once told me, God's always late. I said, no, we think he's late. Lamentations 3 tells us, the Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. Later in Isaiah 30, he says, therefore the Lord waits to be gracious to you. He waits to be gracious to you. And therefore he exalts himself to show mercy to you. Do you realize his exaltation is to show you mercy? For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are those who wait for him. Maybe you should put that on a card. Isaiah 40:31 says, but they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. Do you think of waiting on the Lord to act as a renewing of your strength? Because this is what it's telling us right here. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up like wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. That's some energy. That's some tenacity. Those who wait upon the Lord. But I want to ask you a question. What are you waiting for? I remember as a kid always feeling like, I'm always waiting for something. And then I became an adult and I realized that's true. You're always waiting for something, aren't you? What are you waiting for? That's the question I have. Because what you wait for determines how patient you'll be, if you have joy or sadness. If you wait on temporal things that don't last, when they finally come, guess what? They still don't last. You say, well, I'm waiting for eternal peace. And I get that. I'm waiting for heaven, as people might say. And I admire what you're saying there, but again, the problem is that you're waiting for a thing. You're waiting for the peace to come, and your affection is based on the thing. But that is not what Isaiah was talking about. He said, God dwell with us. It's about a person that is coming that has that power to give peace, not the peace itself. The best example I can get to this is if you marry somebody because you want the effects of the marriage. You want this ideal in your head, and then as soon as you're married to them, you're like, who's this person? I thought I was going for this. No. If you marry a person, it's because you want to be with that person. You see what I'm saying here? There's a difference. Like if you're marrying because you want the effects of something, like, oh, maybe they have a bunch of money, or maybe it's, a physical relationship that you want. But if you're marrying them for those reasons, that is not going to last. As good as maybe those things are, right? But if you're marrying the person because you want to dwell with that person, like I remember I couldn't wait to marry my wife because I was so tired of driving back and forth. I just wanted to be with her all the time. It's to dwell with her. And the benefits came from that. What do you want? What are you waiting for? Isaiah 1 through 12 gives us hope because he's pointing us to the fact that God has come in pursuit of us to dwell with us. Do you want him? Do you want to dwell with him? Is he worth waiting for? If God is with us, friends, if God with us is our greatest hope, it will alter our present reality. It does. I oscillate in and out of this. There are times, friends, I'm all about, I just want to be with God. I just want to be with him. I'm like, I'm so hungry. And then there's times I'm like, I just kind of want the benefits sometimes too. You guys struggle with that too? If God with us is our greatest hope, not the presence or whatever else, short-term hardships will be put in their place. This is where Paul says that you can count it all joy. I count it all joy when I go through all kinds of stuff, trials, persecution. Why? Because the short-term hardship is worth it because he gets God. If God with us is our greatest hope, anticipation of the temporal things are muted. What do I mean by that? If God with us, the temporal things, like a kid waiting for a present, it's muted. Well, I can wait. It is something good. Eternity with him is going to be awesome. But it's not the golden streets and the whatever you want to conjure up to the mind, but rather it's dwelling with him. I get to finally be with him without my sin in between us. If God with us is our greatest hope, comfort in the present moment. We have comfort in the present moment. If God is with us, He's our greatest hope, we have comfort in the present moment. What Paul says, he can be content in all circumstances. Why is it that the disciples can sing in prison? Because they're content. Because God is dwelling with them. Let's pray.